one of the major things in my life has been those people who have been allowed me to do the things that I've done and to help me create the things. And it's the wonderful, wonderful friends that I've had over the years. That has meant so much to me. And so that's initially, that's one of the great things in my life, is people like Clara, who was willing to take a chance with me. Well, I have tried more or less to be a background, and I'm always pleased when they put a brochure and then exhibition design, they'll put my name into it. People were willing to take a chance with, they didn't know what I was going to do. I got, I guess, enough of a reputation that carried on. Well, I have been interested in art from way back, from high school, grade school. I had a wonderful parents back in my hometown. My dad never built a house for us, but he always rented. And one of these rental places had a fireplace in it. And I decided one day, you know, that fireplace is movable. So I pulled the fireplace out, and my mother came home. Here was the fireplace right in the middle of the living room. And I eventually cut out the mirror and the area above it. Then we hung pictures and things. So I had an early start in being involved with the arts. And so usually when I get an exhibit, and it's interesting, over the years, I think that I have only been responsible for the collection of 2 or 3 shows. Every show I've had have been people have brought their collections in and so forth. And so what I quite often do, and the students who help me know it, they bring in and put the artwork around, either standing against a wall on the floor or whatever, and then I get rid of them. And then I can go in and figure out, analyze all of the things that I have to work with, and then how this might be assembled. And very often I make sketches, little things. I've got a whole bunch of these in here, little sketches of backs of envelopes and whatever. And then after I figured that out, then they come back in and they put up and I've had wonderful, the students I've had over the years that have helped put the shows up are just amazing. Yeah, so I've been extremely, extremely fortunate over the years with the people who are willing to let me do it. And I remember Dr. Durrell, we had an exhibit of his paintings, and so he brought his things in, and he came in, and he was going to help me plan the exhibit. And after a while, he said, "Oh, I don't need to be here," so he left. Luckily, I've had very, very few people whose collections that they got involved in, so on. Well, I came here as a result of the GI Bill. I still remember registration in front of Johnson Hall. There were all these GIs waiting to get in to register. They went through the windows all over. Stella Morris is one of the people involved at that time. And so they finally got all of us registered. And I had started back in my hometown in Maryville, Missouri, and had taken a few courses. And so those transferred here. And my cousin Horace showed me a catalog of what CSU, well, it wasn't CSU, it was Colorado A&M at that time, and semesters. And so we looked through it, and I thought, gee, they've got a lot of courses I'd be interested in. So that was kind of the start of going to school here. And I, fortunately or unfortunately, took all of the courses I wanted, all of the elected courses, everything and then came the junior, senior year, and I thought, oh my gosh, if I'm going to graduate, I've got to have all these required courses. So I had to go back and take, during my junior, senior year, chemistry and all of these different courses, and it was just terrible for me. So, but I made it through. I had a lot of wonderful teachers that helped me get through, because I wasn't exactly the best of students, but I got involved with theater, and that was one of the bright things in my life. And when Old Main, the theater, it was a drama club, it was called, and R.J. Waddles was in charge of that, and I can still remember her. She always sat at the back of the auditorium, and everything would be going on stage, and you'd hear this voice out of the dark, project, project, and you'd hear, but she had a wonderful way of directing. She let the individual create their own part and so on. And I did stage sets on that. When I graduated in '49, I took all kinds of tests to determine what you should go into, the profession and so on. And I went through this one test, or two or three of them, and the fellow doing it, he said, well, either you blew the test or you ought to be a teacher. And teaching was the farthest from my mind. I thought at that particular time that eventually I would go into architecture and design. And I thought, teaching? Well, almost a year later, I got a letter from Clara Hatton saying they were looking for somebody to teach a brand new course called Applied Home Furnishings. And it was for extension people. And it would be upholstering and drapery and picture framing and lamps and all of that. And I thought, well, I might as well take it, because I knew Clara and Elizabeth Gifford had to, Dyer, I should say, had to approve it. And so that started it, came back here. And I was part-time teaching. My salary at that time for the full year was $1,800. And I remember the second year I got a $1,000 raise, and that was wonderful. Yeah. But I got to teach things that I enjoy doing, and I really had never completely upholstered a chair, and so I got an old chair. I'd take it apart at night to see what was inside, then I'd put it back together, and then when I demonstrate for the students how to take it apart and so on. I had wonderful people in Denver I think it was called American Fabrics at that time in Lodo, and they helped me buy all the equipment for upholstering and everything. So, and I have to say early, it is because of so many wonderful, wonderful people in my life that I'm here today. So, but he would help me all the time, and I got books on how to do upholstery, and one of the things that's always I don't know what year, but to have a woman come up to me, she said, I still have the chair that I upholstered in your class. So that was lots of fun. I tried for students, to get them interested in color and try to introduce it in a totally different way. And I don't know of anybody else doing quite like I did, but it was based on perspective. And the students took a piece of paper and folded it, and that became the horizon line and dots at the end, and they had to put 3 or 4 actually vertical lines, one above the crease, one cutting through it, and one below it. And those are the only 3 places it could be. And then they connected the top and bottom and eventually made cubes. And then they opened the cubes up with doors and windows. And I still remember one of the fellows got so involved and it was getting complex. Said, "You've got to stop. It's just too complex." And he had pipes going in and out and up and down. It was wonderful. But anyway, after that, then they started the color. And so they figured out which planes were closest to the viewer. And then progressively, the color either became lighter if they had white background or darker if it has a black background. The intensity changed from close to distant. And so they learned perspective and how to look at things and make it look like it's actually the way it is. So that was, I always like to introduce projects that way. And then they did a project of so-called drawing plants. And instead of lines, they used dots. And they just put dots on. So if the plant was dark, there were a whole lot of dark dots. And if it was light, then there were no dots. And they made great big drawings, beautiful things. And again, I remember one student coming back, it was at the end of the year for semester, and she came back and she said, "My mother framed that project with a perspective, and it's now hanging above the fireplace at our home." So I could see that it paid off. But the beauty of it for me was that these were students that were non-majors, and I wanted to help them see how they could express themselves and interpret things that they were looking at and so on. So the non-majors were wonderful to work with. I didn't thoroughly enjoy lecturing, and I always used props, so to speak. I'm kind of going around here, but at that particular time, we didn't have carousel projectors or anything like that. We had these Bell Opticon that had a lens about this big, weighed I don't know how many pounds, huge thing, and you put the picture in, and it projected then onto the screen. And I always thought they when they worked the scheduling out, they made it as hard as they could, because I taught in practically every building around the Oval, up and down the vet and the forestry. Then at that time there was a South Hall in back of the administration building. I taught all over campus, and I had to carry this dumb thing around. And you go into the rooms, and you had to pull the shades down because it was all windows and light. So I always planned that I would arrive there just as the previous instructor was finishing, and I'd dash in and pull the blinds down and plug in the projector and then get the screen down. So it was a struggle. But going back, I enjoyed the students. I particularly liked the one-on-one relationship. And when I was doing the house planning, home furnishings, and then eventually interior design, to look at their work, and I never drew on their plans or anything. I always put tracing paper on, and then on top of that, because I didn't want to destroy their original idea, but I wanted to show them how they could improve it, and that was the basis for a lot of the one-on-one. I love the students. I miss them more. I don't miss the politics or all of that connected with the area, but working with the students. And I used to do my grading at night, and we're currently the interior design program, but I could look down and see the students in there. So I'd always go in and walk around, talk to them. And a number of the students have commented on how they were working late at night, and I'd come in and look at their work and so on. So the students are wonderful, wonderful. DT Square was a community project for the citizens to more or less tell what they would like this community to develop into. DT Square was designing tomorrow, today. And so we had all kinds of committees I was on two of them. One was the art committee, and the other was the eventually Lincoln Center committee. And there was also, plus a new city hall, a library building, the swimming pool, athletic areas. There was a series of these projects. The citizens met and talked about what they would like to have included in it. And then eventually we voted on it, and it passed. I think a 1% tax went toward all of these projects. It was amazing. And then the city grew with that. We have our wonderful Lincoln Center now as a result of that, and the swimming pool area, and the new city hall, and all of that came about through that DTC. But it was the citizen involvement in it. The architects were from Denver, but they had never done anything like this. And so they analyzed Lincoln Center. Originally, they were going to take over what's the Little Theater now, the Magnolia Theater now. And that was going to be, well, that was the little dinky thing. So then they tore the whole building down, which was the junior high school. And incidentally, my grandparents lived right across the street, so I was quite familiar with Lincoln Center area. Well, anyway, that was going to be, the art area was going to be, and so they tore that building down. And so the art kind of decreased, that committee kind of decreased and became a part of the Lincoln Center area. And Lilla Morgan and Frank would get the plans from the architects, and then they'd have meetings. Well, I'd meet with them before they met with the architects, and I'd say, now this is what you need to change here, and went through the plan, and then they told the architects, and they carried through on quite a number of changes that I had suggested. So I got involved early into Lincoln Center. I had been involved with the Lincoln Center from right at the very beginning, and working with Lilla Morgan and Frank Johnson and so on. So I've had my foot in the door. Made me think of, I ramble, but I remember Clara Hatton, and if she could get her foot in the door to get something like a new class or space, she would go on and open until she got, she took over spaces and got, we had classes going on that we didn't even have an art department at that time when she started. And so all of the courses that she kept adding were eventually put into the art department courses. The gallery was in the student center, was at the south end of the building. And I don't know exactly the dates and when, but eventually they added the gallery and the Senate on that end of the building. And it's a one-story building. The rest of the building is two-story. And so that was a one-story addition to the south. And I remember the very first exhibit we did in what became the Curfman Gallery. I have, again, it's been these wonderful, wonderful friends that I've had who, Mims Harris was very instrumental in getting it named for me as the Curfman Gallery. But the very first exhibit we did in there was one of the editions of Rodin's The Thinker. And here this was, I put that in on the west wall. I still remember I put benches around. And when the students came in, here they are seeing a work that they had seen pictures of, but there it was, The Thinker. And they came in, it was most interesting, because it was like they were going to church. No one ever spoke above a whisper. They just came in, and they'd sit there, and they'd examine it, and it was a wonderful experience as a very first exhibit. The next one we did was Maria the Potter, and Bill Alexander, teaching ceramics, was able to get her son Popovida to come here and demonstrate and so forth. And I can still remember. And she wouldn't let him come by himself. She had to come too. So we got two of them. And she sat there, I can still remember the open area, and she sat there with a little stick, and she'd tap on the ground to get him to come over, and he was demonstrating how to do it. All the students were around. It was outdoors. And then eventually we put up an exhibit of her work, his work, and then the grandsons. We had 3 generations of potters there. And then partway through the exhibit, then we put the student projects in that they had done under Maria and Popovada. So that was the second one, and then from there on, we did all kinds of things. I wouldn't, well, frankly, I wouldn't be here if it hadn't been for people like Clara and the different ones connected. And I felt that, and I didn't get totally involved in it, but the creation of a scholarship in my name was something I never expected ever to happen, and which has been wonderful. And it's a design scholarship, and it ends up that it's in 2 colleges. I started in one, and then there was all of the art design areas and the theater design and so on. So I had to expand into the second area. So now I give 3 scholarships, and which I get a big kick out of that. And the students are there, and I get to talk to them and so on. And then I had, years ago, I began getting some monies, and eventually we put that into the foundation. So there's an additional funds that are for the galleries and museums and galleries on campus. They won't get it till I die, but they'll at least have a source. And I look at all of the wonderful things that the Lilla Morgan Foundation has given to all of the different areas and so on. So that was my little bit contributing back to what had been given to me. I've been involved in that with Linda Carlson. Linda Carlson and I started doing exhibits on the top floor, and we took over what was studio space, turned it into galleries, and then we moved from there down to the first floor to get the Gustafson Gallery, and named for Dagmar, who was a dear friend, and I took classes under Dagmar. I never worked so hard in my life. I took a tailoring course with her, and she had me stitching, and it was just unbelievable. But she was a old school, and you had to do it exactly this way. None of this sewing machine type of stuff. You were hand doing all of the things. It was educational. I thought I would be doing things that related to theater and costumes and so forth. And so I even have a picture here. I made the Journal of Home Economics cover one time, and so there I am working on a costume for. Well, anyway, but that was some of the involvement early, and then because of those early periods, then we eventually got, which now is unbelievable, the wonderful setup that Linda has with the collections. I just marvel at it, what we've got now in the way of this wonderful building and a gallery, and then the possibility of future additions to that in another gallery, and two galleries. And it's just amazing to see how this has grown. And going back to like the Curfman Gallery, we put up the very first gallery in a building next to Guggenheim, and we took over a classroom. There was 2 entrances to the building, and it has an arched entrance. and we converted that into a gallery space. And I'm going around, but the faculty put up an exhibit, and they put up the student work, and I came in at night, and it was just, I couldn't stand it. It was just a mess. So overnight, I redesigned the whole space, put it the way it should, for me, the way it should have been. And they said, well, if you're going to do that, you can do all of the shows from there on. So that was more or less how I got involved in doing the exhibits from there on. A lot of it is not only just the art, but what encompasses, like photography, the landscape, and outside, the interiors, and all that kind of stuff, to make people appreciate or be able to understand, to evaluate things, either based on color, and so that's why I mentioned the project using perspective to get into color. And I use that as a, well, the students now, if you're taking that, look at things and they'll know how do you make things go off into the distance or advance and so on. So it had a practical nature. In doing the exhibits, I tried to plan it so that the viewer would get an art appreciation, so to speak. And I had wonderful PR. Bob Forsyth, who was here teaching in history of art, wrote an article, and he mentioned how I had taken a circle and Dave Hughes' paintings and Nilda Getty's display, and there were some other things, and how the circle, I had picked it up, carried it throughout the exhibit. So, but that's my fun of trying to come up with a way of presenting things that people will get an appreciation or an understanding. I don't write, I use visual ways of informing people. I think there's a kind of a tragedy in our public schools of cutting out art, cutting out the theater, cutting out those things to be able to pay for it. And I think it's just tragic to see a lot of programs just going down. And I think that's where a lot of students, they need that background introduction, whether it's theater or whatever it might be. It should occur early. And I think also, I had wonderful parents. And in my hometown, we had one of the state teachers' colleges. And we would have wonderful programs, dance groups, theater groups that came through, and they were named people that they would get and have it that available. And now I look at what we have here in Fort Collins. In the early days, the only, so to speak, cultural things was CSU. And it was, they created MIMS and I'm blanking out, Shelton Stanfield put together what became the art program, and they brought in theater groups that were in residence, putting on one production after another. I still remember it was a Friday afternoon, and we had the Budapest String Quartet on stage. And the place was packed with students. It was just wonderful. And when the thing finished, there was this wonderful standing ovation. Never thought I'd see it. Sorry. Well, I feel fortunate. I was on the original Cultural Resources Board here in Fort Collins, and that was kind of an exciting period because it had to do historic landmarks as well, and people were coming in and were proposing doing all kinds of things in Fort Collins and so on, and we were instrumental in trying to promote where the old fort originally was and so forth. So Yeah, I feel very, very fortunate. And also another part of this is that um, my mother was raised here in Fort Collins, and my grandfather, Petty, uh, was a local jeweler downtown. And periodically somebody will come up and say, my mother bought their wedding ring and from Petty the jeweler and so on. So, but I was so glad that he settled in Fort Collins because that was the kind of the start of being coming out here. And we always came out here in the summers uh, to visit my grandparents and my aunts and uncles and cousins and so on. We have senses, obviously sound and being able to speak, but sight is so important. And that the visual things that you see, and art was a means of expressing that. Different artists and represent. It's interesting because the history line from earliest man is all visual. The cave paintings type of things, and all of those, and working with stones, the great arrowheads, and so on. They're all visual things that we could use. And so, and then the artist expanded that into a great variety of colors and eventually photography and so on. It was interesting. Photography was never, ever considered as a fine art. It was just, and the same thing was true of sketches. The original drawings that the artists made were never considered. They were never exhibited in museums. But then they finally realized that that was the basis for the artwork. And so that became very important to have the photography and the sketches and the preliminary things. Well, I am again fortunate that people have asked me to design exhibits for them or to continue at Lincoln Center. I'm on the city payroll now, so I'm with Lincoln Center. So, but it's wonderful that people have asked me, and when they put up the Arvada Center, I was asked to come down and do the very first exhibit there. I still remember that. It was the Harmson collection of artwork. They were the ones that started the Jolly Rancher Candy Company, and they don't have it any longer. But and so I would get the whole gallery space all worked out the way I want, and then he'd walk in and he said, "Oh, I've got 2 more paintings," and then I have to redesign to get those 2 paintings in. So I had a lot of fun over the years of doing it. But and then when the Greeley colony, they're like comparable to our Lincoln Center. When they did that, they asked me to do the first show. Then I got involved with a museum in Denver, the Museum of Western Art. And that was because of a good friend who was a photographer, and he told the owners that they ought to get me involved in it. So I got to lay out their whole gallery space. I got to change some of the space. They originally had in one of the galleries on the second floor a raised platform with steps to go up to it, and the idea was that people would go up and look at the artwork. I said, "You can't do that. A handicapped person cannot get up there. You have to." And so they completely changed the plan, and I felt so good. Then the owner of the collection, whenever something would come up, he'd call me. He said, "Well, now the architects want to put in this type of lighting here. Do you think we need that?" And I thought, "No, you don't need that." And so I saved him a lot of money. Then I got involved with the banks in Denver, and I did a number of shows down there. It was wonderful. I would give them the diagram of what I wanted and so forth. Then I was teaching all the time. Then I'd come down on a weekend and put up the show. And I remember at the First National Bank there, it was an annex to the building, and we had done a Harmson collection of Navajo weaving and so forth here, and he decided he would have it in Denver. And so I gave them all of the information, the layout of the space and that thing. And I still remember a friend of mine, Chuck Coors, went down there and Saturday or Friday, and lo and behold, here was a stack of sheetrock and the wood and everything. And they said, oh, we couldn't figure out how to do it. So the two of us had to build the whole exhibit ourselves, paint it, and oh. I always felt that when I did a show, I really had to be able to justify why I did it. Now, I didn't write it down or anything, but I had to really, in my own mind, figure, why did I put that in a certain place? Or why is this the way it is? And I tried to figure, like I said, to justify the arrangement and so on. And but I always, if you look at my drawings, very often you'll find sight lines. I've always been interested in what people see when they come in. And very often what I would do in the Curfman gallery is to put something rather startling way off in the distance. And you would see it from when you came in, but then once you get in, it disappears. And so you have to keep wandering through until you finally get back there to see that piece. And I remember the typical exhibits in most museums just line the walls. And I remember going back to the Metropolitan and seeing a Rembrandt exhibit. And I stepped into the room, and here were these portraits. And it went all the way around. I couldn't take it. It was just, everything was spaced exactly the same distance apart, and it was, it wasn't interesting. It wasn't inviting. Now, a historian and somebody who was interested in seeing what he did as he progressed would see that. But I was kind of the average person looking at that. Oh my gosh, you know. And of course, they do it for several reasons. Security, that the guard can stand there and look at everything. I've always, the responses I've gotten from other people. Remember, we did an exhibit of a woman painter in Denver, Raquel Barchelon, and at that particular time, this is because of color, I knew that if you had a black background and anything that you put on against that, when light hits that black, it's absorbed. When you put a white background, the light is reflected back to your eye, and very often the object, whatever it might be, is kind of wiped out because it doesn't have, the light is coming back from that object is not comparable to the white walls. So there was a period in which the galleries, the Hatton and the Curfman, had black walls. The staff hated it because nobody ever used black walls. You know? But I had felt walls black, and so I would put these objects against the black, and I did this Raquel Barchelon's paintings, and I remember her husband saying, you know, I see these paintings every day, but that is the first time I really have seen them against the black wall. The paintings just jumped out right at you, and you saw them in a totally different light. And that a little of a number of the shows, I try to, in the case of Peter Jacobs, he used ladders in a number of his, three-dimensional as well as paintings. And I put them together. There was one that he had which had a flag draped over the ladder and so forth. And so I kind of collect them. But I like to, I think this may be a little of the mystery writers who write stories, and they hold off. They give you a few clues as you go along, and then they finally, you make, oh, that's it. You finally realize the what it was that you were working towards, and the surprise element. And I like that, to be able to not let everybody see every. I don't like people to come into the gallery and stand at the top and look around and then leave. I want to get them into the gallery, and like I mentioned, having a distant thing that's more dominant that would pull you through the gallery space. So I'm careful in planning it so that, but if you look at my little drawings, sight lines are very important. Did one show in the textile area, and it was kind of threads around the world or something like that. And you could go to the center of the gallery, and you could look off all 360 degrees all the way around, and I put wedged display cases all the way around so you could see. Now you probably didn't catch it until you moved to the center to see that. And I don't expect people to always get what I do, but I have to give them something else besides just hanging them on the walls. And so it becomes an experience, an emotional experience for the viewer. I feel fortunate that way. Some have told me that the way I did it, they began to see something new in their work. They hadn't, and I'm coming from a different viewpoint than theirs, the creator, and I hope that I'm a little like the average viewer that coming in to look at the exhibits and so on. I think that in my background, people like Clara Hatton, who were instrumental in my coming here, back in my hometown, it was a lady named Olive Deleuze, and these were the people that were instrumental in expanding my ideas on art and teaching and so forth. And to be able to, and I did, at the time I didn't think too much of it that I would go into teaching, but that the influence, in the interior design program, which I got eventually involved in, I moved from one college to another college, back to another college, and I was being shifted around all over. And the individual students, the lectures I enjoyed, to masses of students to open their eyes. Always when I gave lectures, I tried to show examples, visual examples. I can't imagine teaching a course in interior design and not having examples for the students to look at in a lecture. And that's why I carry that dumbbell opticon all over. And if you left the picture in too long, it would burn up. Well, anyway, carousels were wonderful. They got smaller and lighter, but I think you've got. That's why I've always wanted to have visual things to explain the ideas and why people did certain things. But what I so enjoyed was working one-to-one with the students. And it was, I think of another, we did a project in which they had to create a cube, and that cube was 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet. That had to be an environment that they would live in, sleep in, study, work, so forth and so on. And I had one student who, they made little figures of themselves and so on. But the one student had a television set, and when I looked at it, I thought, oh my gosh, she had my picture face in the television set in this. So things like that are so wonderful, and to have them later on come back and let you know how much it meant to them over the years. And in the gallery, I did shows at the Denver Art Museum. This is appropriate because Valentine's Day was when they would have these. There was an auction to raise money for the contemporary collection, and they got me involved in that. I did the first one. First one I went down to see, and it was in the lobby of not the new edition, the old building, and here were paintings on the walls, and I went in. I said, "Well, which walls do I get?" They said, "Walls? You don't get any walls. You get the windows." And so I had to hang all of the artwork, posters and whatever, happened to be vents up there with wires coming down, and being Valentine's Day, I had a heart cut out and it hung from the corny. But the administration down there wasn't too in favor of this auction to raise money. And luckily, we had posters and oh gosh, but they sold out everything and started making money. And from there on, I kept doing their shows. And I got an award. I got the Golden Hammer Award, which was nice. But as it went on, I eventually got the walls that they were speaking about that I couldn't hang. And then they gave me gallery space. So I had a great big gallery to work with and so on. And I still remember the lady in charge. I had luckily, they had a catalog with pictures of everything. And so I planned the complete exhibit. And I can still remember this lady was in charge, and she said, and things were back in a storeroom, and then they bring them out, and I'd say, "Oh, now it goes there," told them where they all went. And she said, "I can't believe you're that well organized." Well, you have to be if you're putting up a show. But anyway, she was kind of amazed that I had it all organized, because I think what she thought, I just put them wherever I wanted them.